So welcome everybody. See a lot of new faces, which is awesome. I'm Justin Nahama. I'll be your MC. I've been your MC the last 4 weeks, this week and next week. A few housekeeping considerations. Tonight is going to be recorded for use on our website. So if you have an issue with that and you want to save your questions till the end, that's completely fine. But just please be aware that the session is being recorded. As always, thank you for registering for the event so Kelly doesn't have to kill you. Please continue to register. Next week is our last week. So sign up, spread the word, the more the merrier. On your seats, you'll also see this kind of flyer. It's information about a free session on leasing space. If you think for your company you will be leasing space in the next 6 months or a year, it's worthwhile to attend this session. It's being put on by Hughes Marino and one of our real estate partners, Don Saunders in the back. Don, raise your hand. If you have any questions about the program, Don will be around afterwards. And this isn't officially part of our startup series, but it's something free the firm's putting on. So if it can help you, registration materials on the back, please sign up. So since we have a bigger crowd tonight, just by a show of hands, how many veterans do we have in the room, or if you're currently on active duty? Just raise your hand.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your service. For the new folks here tonight, the reason we put this program on is because we wanted to kind of give back in a way to set your companies up for success. These programs aren't about us, they're about you. So please ask questions. We have an awesome panel for tonight, week 5, which is about funding. These guys will show you the ins and outs of borrowing, things lenders are looking for. So pick their brains, take advantage. We want it to be interactive. And as always, we'll be sticking around for a half hour or so afterwards. So if you have any questions, come track us down. So thanks all. Enjoy.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Justin. So show of hands, how many in the Army? Whoa. Yeah? Whoa. And Navy? God, there's a lot of y'all all the time. Air Force? Like nobody from the Air Force. Marine Corps? Yeah, few but strong. That's all you need, really, to take over the room. Oh my God. So I'm really stoked about the extremely awesome turnout for this evening. Y'all must have heard that we are actually giving away $10,000 in startup funds for the startups who present the best today. But April Fools, so he's like, wait. We will give you more than $10,000 worth of advice, worth of information, worth of knowledge, and so really do take advantage of this and pick our brains, as Justin was saying.
You saw Eddie out there going like, whoa.
I'm like, I'm ready.
You're ready. So your handouts there is about a tome, okay? There's a lot of information in those slides. We won't be able to dig into everything on there. Even if we were to just read the bullet points, we'd be here for over an hour. So we're going to hit treetops on a lot of this stuff, but feel free to have this be an organic discussion. We're going to dig into some of the nuances of debt financing, some of the nuances of equity financing. We're going to get into crowdfunding, all sorts of different kinds of things, okay? But really that tome for you is your resource should any questions arise after this evening. Our contact information is in the back of that, so you can follow up with us afterwards, okay? So one of the slides in there, I think it's 2 or 3, is the outline of what we're going to be talking about. This is just a guideline, if you will, okay? So first of all, who's heard the saying, like I said in the first one, who's here for the first session? Okay, so you heard me say the plan is nothing, planning is everything, right? Just the same thing. When we take that concept and apply it to funding issues, it's all about trying to figure out where you are going to need that capital in the inflection points in your business. What are those growth spaces where you're going to need to fill in some capital to get your product, your service to market, right? So without that plan, it all goes, well, you know where it goes. So some financing rules of thumb. We won't go into this all that deeply, but basically raise money when you don't need it, right? How many folks here actually need funds right now to start a business? Is that it? Really? That's all? The rest of you are self-financed and fully funded, and okay, that's pretty cool.
Yes. Our job's done.
Good crowd. But really, identify that model, figure out where it is you're going to need that capital and bring it in. So let me stop right there and introduce the rest of the panel. Joe, we want to give 2 seconds about yourself and your practice here?
2 seconds. My name is Joe Dunn. I'm an attorney here at Mintz Levin.
Awesome. That was well done.
I think that was 3 seconds.
Was that 3 seconds? So I work in commercial debt and restructuring most of my practice, but that spans everything from working with borrowers and lenders in financing transactions early on, mid-span, and then working on commercial litigation disputes when the transactions don't work out. But what's been interesting over the last 7 or 8 years is working on restructuring debt. And as you may imagine, there's been a lot of bankruptcy and restructurings necessary with companies. And so a big chunk of my work is focused on that and finding workout situations.
So one of those other idioms about planning, right? Begin with the end in mind. If your goal is to conquer Baghdad, to capture Baghdad, you start with that in mind and figure out how you're going to get there. Joe sees things from when things turn to crap, and he can help you avoid that kind of stuff. So that's what Joe does, right? So next to me, we got Robert Reyes of StartupCircle.
Hello, everyone. So I guess quickly tell you about myself. I consider myself an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. Why? Because I've had the journey of starting businesses and succeeding at some and failing at some of those. But also I've been lucky enough to also be inside big companies and be involved with technology and recently even with craft beer. So I got a pretty broad experience and lucky enough to hopefully share that with you. Why I'm on this panel is that I've founded an organization called StartupCircle in 2006 here in San Diego, which focused on really bringing entrepreneurs together. And initially was just to connect with innovators, and it's evolved now. And part of that journey in 2006, one of the biggest things that I found, I was investing in early companies when I came into San Diego to see what was exciting and put money in good things. Realized there was a big gap in the funding side here. And fast forwarding now, everybody's saying, I need funding, I need funding. I think it's needed, but it's not, I would say, the reason why you succeed. But I brought partners from the Bay Area called Plug and Play Tech Center, which is a $1.8 billion fund that we invest in companies. We also have facilities around the world, but mainly three locations, one very large location in Sunnyvale, about 180,000 square feet. And we got about 250 companies at any given time that we either invested in or that we're working on. And one of the things that applies to San Diego, last year when we officially launched the Plug and Play platform in San Diego, we invested in 10 companies, and we're looking at doing at least the same this year. And my plug for tonight is that if you guys want to see how this works and what we're about, May 6th, we're having our next selection event. It'll be downtown. Go to Plug and Play San Diego or StartupCircle. You see details there. So I'll stop.
Right on. Thanks, Robert. And to my left, another Robert Lopez of Accion.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. My name is Robert Lopez. I'm the Director of Lending with Accion San Diego. We're a local microfinance institution, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We provide small loans. And so what we do is we provide access to capital for entrepreneurs that can't access traditional forms of capital. And that could be different barriers. That could be credit, being a startup, not having enough collateral, different barriers that exist when accessing capital. And so we try to tear down those barriers and really look at the character and the feasibility of the entrepreneur and the idea that they have, and hopefully fund them and have them grow and succeed. So not only do we provide the access to capital anywhere from $300 all the way up to $50,000, but we also provide the technical assistance to make sure that the entrepreneur is successful with that capital that we're deploying. So in 2010, we funded about 100 businesses. And then we did a study in 2012 to see
San Diego, Robert?
Just San Diego County. And we did a study in 2012 to see how they're doing, and 87% of them continue to be in business and growing, which is completely backward from the national average. Most startups fail, but our clients do pretty well, and that's just because of resources that we provide for them. We feel that's a resource we provide for them. So we'll tell you a little more about microfinance as we get to that portion of the presentation.
Cool. Thanks, Robert. And so Robert's at Accion, they are sort of the minor league feeder team system for the major league commercial banks like Wells Fargo. Down in the end, we got my fellow Marine, Dan Adams.
I'll try not to grunt. So I'm Dan Adams. I manage the commercial lending group here in San Diego for Wells Fargo for small business finance for Wells Fargo. at Wells Fargo in this community in San Diego for what we refer to as small business. That's businesses doing anything from, relatively startup to $20 million a year in revenue. We're going to lend about $950 million to those businesses in San Diego. So I'm here really to pull back the curtain, give you an idea, because typically what you're doing is talking to a banker perhaps who may actually just be the person giving you the message. I'm the, basically the credit officer for the bank in that region as well, or in this region as well. So I want to pull back the curtain and really just be transparent to everybody and hear about how banks lend, what we do, what we look for, what we don't look for, and answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thanks, gents. So one of the first things that we should talk about is what is a company's financial health and what you should be considering when you're looking to raise capital. So Joe, you want to tell us a little bit about what companies should consider?
Sure. So I guess, when you're starting with the analysis of financial health and do you have a healthy company, you should ask yourself, why are you asking that question? Well, presumably if you're here, or some of you that are here, you need funding. And so the question is, who's your audience? Who are you trying to convince that you have a healthy company? Because they're going to be looking at different aspects of financial health to determine whether they agree with you, whether you've made your case, and whether they want to give you money. So I think knowing, are you talking to a lender? What kind of a lender? Are you talking to an investor? What are their goals? Because if you look on this slide, there are different aspects to really evaluating what financial health is. And while everyone you're talking to about this, from a lender to an investor, has a stake in your success, they want you to succeed, that window of evaluation is probably going to be different for each of them. Some may be short-term lenders, and they have a very short window. And they're looking at, are you healthy enough to repay me? From the investor side, they're looking at, are you going to grow? Are you going to be profitable? Are you going to have a shareholder value in the future that I can take advantage of? So that's the first question to ask yourself, is how do I, as the business owner, present my financial health in the best light to who I'm talking to? That kind of plays into looking at each of these. So market value, what is this company worth? If I were to package this company and take it out and want to sell it, what is it going to be worth? What is that goodwill that I've created with my company worth? Is that something that is transferable? When looking at profitability, that may be more important for a lender who's looking to get paid back. They want to see that you're running a profitable company and that you have the liquidity to make the payments that you've agreed to make. And then finally, looking at the valuation of your assets. I think being close to the project, being close to the company, sometimes we or business owners perceive value differently than someone on the outside looking in. And so taking that valuation and really supporting it and making sure that you can present your case, especially to an asset-based lender or someone who's going to be looking to ultimately get secured in your assets, is very important. So I think the point is planning ahead of time to make your presentation of valuation and making your pitch of why you have a healthy company and something worth investing in is an important first step.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Hey, so Robert, so you said you loan amounts from $300 to $50,000. I can imagine that a presentation from a business owner coming in for $300 is a lot different from someone trying to raise $50,000. How do you view financial health of a company in those two different situations?
I think for us it's a little bit different because we're looking at you as the individual. So there's this misconception that if I have a LLC, if I have a corporation, I'm separate from that company. But when you're looking at a brand new company, a smaller company, there is no difference. There is no difference at a bank. There is no difference at an institution like ours. You have to. Everyone always asks me, "What's the first thing I should do?" And what's the most common answer that you get? What's the first thing you should do when you're starting a business? What was that? A what? A business plan, right? Is that what everybody tells you?
No.
No?
Have your intellectual property covered.
What was that? Well, you're not inventing.
I'm hearing intellectual
If you're not
property, I'm
intellectual
hearing
property.
incorporate, I'm hearing business plan.
Right. So most of the time it takes
You should find a good lawyer is what you should do.
That sounds about right. And so most people tell you, textbooks tell you should start a business plan, but I always tell our clients that's not the first step. The first step is to look at yourself. To look at yourself in different aspects. Am I financially ready to commit to being an entrepreneur? Am I mentally ready to commit to being an entrepreneur? Is the lifestyle that I want that to be an entrepreneur? A lot of people have these ideas that being an entrepreneur is freedom, and I get to create my own schedule, and I get to be my own boss. Yeah, right. Most entrepreneurs work 12 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, thinking about their business. They can't stop thinking about their business. So you could get to that point in one day if you're successful, but the bottom line is that your lifestyle as an entrepreneur is going to change. And so we want to make sure that you as an individual are prepared for that lifestyle shift, that you're prepared financially to make that commitment, and that you understand your business in and out to see if you're ready for that next step. We see a lot of times that clients succeed and fail not because they don't understand their business, but they don't understand how to be a business owner. And there's a big difference. You could be the best plumber in the world, the best mechanic in the world, but if you don't know how to run a business, you're probably going to fail because there's so many different steps to running a business. So there's a whole holistic, organic way to look at the individual, and that's really what we focus on is individual health to make sure that they're ready to start a business. And then we move on to step 2, which is actually jumping into the business. So that's what I would say that we look at as health.
Right on. So there's a lot of emphasis on the team, right? Yeah. So Robert, you mentioned one of the things earlier about being an intrapreneur. So can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe tell us some things that you as an investor would be looking for from a company?
Again, I'll start kind of a little bit. Yeah, two-part question. So what's an intrapreneur? It's someone that is working within a big corporation and then is been given the ability to actually create a business within a larger business. So that's kind of the way to kind of cheat a lot of heartache because you got resources, you got money, you got other challenges within that. But that's what I mean, an entrepreneur and being able to create a business within a company itself has its challenges, and that's also been very exciting for me to be able to experience that. So that's how I would define what an entrepreneur is, and I've done it in semiconductor and in healthcare. Or biotech, and that's been really exciting to do that. But when I talk about the investment side, and I hear what I'm hearing a little bit about you talking about traditional ways to actually get a loan or get financed. And when we're looking at it, we're not looking at it from a finance or banking standpoint, which is important when you look at all this financials and business plan. But absolutely, we'll look at number one, yes, the individual, but I can tell you for me is that. One thing that I've learned out of all the companies that I've looked at and invested in, it's really hard to really kind of give you specific attributes of who's going to be and who's going to make it. But the one thing that I can tell you they all have in common, they had a higher purpose while they were doing that business. And so they really had such a high belief that what they were doing, there was no turning back. And this is what I was going to do no matter what. So it talks a little about your lifestyle, talks about how committed I am to what I'm doing. But that's what we see, people that were, even if I said, I'm not going to give you money, and I think your idea is the stupidest idea I ever heard, didn't care. It just went ding, 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 I'm going forward. And not saying that's going to make you successful, but you at least got to have that kind of level of belief. I
don't think any veterans have that characteristic about them.
Oh, I bet they don't. And so what I can tell you for me, when it comes to the investment, what we look at, we look at the individual. We look at how they're addressing a higher purpose question and problem. And then if I personally connect with that as an investor, then we kind of get to the next point of discussing and getting into more details about how you got to do that. But that's my step one. I'll stop at that.
Appreciate it, Robert. Yeah, that's good stuff. So Dan, can you tell us a little bit about what typical bank customers would be?
Sure. So we're pretty much the opposite of that. We're not looking to own a part of your business. You can bring us a great opportunity, and let me start by dividing. I'll give you traditional bank lending, and then the other part of the lending that we do, which is probably more appropriate for folks in here, is SBA lending, which is a bank loan insured by the government. It's not a government loan, though. Never confuse those two, because a lot of folks have a bias. They'll think SBA sounds like I'm going to the DMV for a loan. It's not. You're going to the bank for a loan, and then we go in the back and get insurance to insure that loan against default. But we're the other side. We're not looking to own your building. We're not looking to own your house, actually, contrary to what you see in the media. And we're not looking to be an investor in your business. We're looking for cash flow. So we're looking historical. If we're looking at traditional bank lending, we're looking based on 2 or 3 years of tax returns. how's the business cash flow? If it gives us enough what we call debt service coverage, in other words, you make enough net profit out of your business to be able to pay us back, we're all fine. Now, as with Robert though, small business, it's still very personal. I mean, we still look at the individuals. We still look at the character. We're going to talk in a second about the 5 C's of credit. Probably the most important for us on small business lending is character, because if everything else works out and you decide that you're just not going to pay because you're done, it's a strategic move or something like that, that's a character issue for us. So that does, as with Robert, it does weigh heavily on us. But again, almost every big bank is not, we don't want to own any of this stuff. We just want to be able to fund it so that you can pay us back. That's how banks make money, is to get paid back, not to sell buildings, not to sell empty buildings.
So how about work when you're starting up your business, like you're trying to get your initial proceeds or funding so that you can get going, you have no history, other than like say like for me, I get out at the end of the year or at the end of the summer, immediately starting all my stuff, but all of my military pay, what I mean?
Right.
Historically, so how would that work?
So using it prospectively.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question is, well, how do you start out? Okay, so I don't have 3 years of tax returns to show a history of making enough profit to pay back the loan. So that's where the SBA would come in. The SBA, again, it's an insurance policy that the bank buys, actually you buy, but we get it from the government, and it would insure us against default. It allows us to take risks. Instead of looking retrospectively at tax returns, we look at your business plan, we look at your background, and we look really to see the soundness of the business. So there are a lot of different variables. Depends on what you would want to do. I would say though, early on, and we pick up where Robert leaves off. So our loans are $50,000 to about, I think the largest we did last year was probably $24 million on real estate. But the most important thing is to get in front of somebody early, because if you come in with a good business plan, good experience, the thing is going to work. Does it make sense? Then we'd probably do that as an SBA loan. Where we sometimes could run into trouble is where the person's going to tough it out. That's why I was a little surprised when Marty asked for hands, who's going to need capital. If you've got a growing business, it is not a source of money. It is a use of money. It is a huge use of money. The cash cycle is so important for you to understand how you're going to get it. You're selling like crazy, but you're going to hit a gap. They will not pay you fast enough for you to pay your folks. Mm-hmm. So when you look and say, if you have a business plan or if you have an idea that you're going to grow a business, you do need to have a source of funds. But more to your point, get in there early, solid business plan, solid advice. So again, that's one of the reasons why we partner with Mintz Levin, because we have a bias towards that. That's a third party that comes in and says, hold on just a second. I mean, for all the passion that you have, let's also say, does this make sense? Because I got a passion for basketball, but I'm not playing basketball here. Yeah. But again, the worst thing you could do is tough it out, because that's where we get stuck, and that's where actually Robert gets stuck. You say, I'm going to fund this myself. I'm going to do it all on my own. I'm going to be a tough guy and just live the American dream. A year later, your credit cards are maxed out, your home equity on your house is maxed out, and you have a cash shortage, and then we're stuck because we can't go prospectively because we already know what's happening, and we don't have enough history to show that you can pay us back.
And just real quick, just to add on to your point, because you're talking about what happens when you just want to start, right, and how you create that beginning. And like you kind of touched on those, and I call them the 3 Fs: friends, family, and fools, and I've been all 3, right? That's been sources of capital where you get from. But in reality, when you look at starting your business, one of the biggest things that I've seen the people that are able to get into this traditional ways of financing is that you start with yourselves in mind. So if you're already kind of, prior you opening your business and creating all this called overhead expense, but you got customers actually giving you early commitments or showing that there's tremendous want for what you're building, that's a much more different discussion. And that's what I always tell people that are just getting started and they believe like, hey, let me get the building, let's get employees, like all these things that kind of really are going to be eating from this business, but where's the influx of revenue coming in? So I always tell early starts to say, how early can you at least get pre-commitments on what you're doing, showing that there is something in the market that's interesting, and it'll open more avenues for you to get funding because people want to see those kinds of things.
Yep, and we'll get into Kickstarter in a little bit too.
Yeah.
Back?
Is this gap the same for service as well for product?
Say that again, please.
Is that gap, is that, hey, you're coming to us a year later, because again, we can go with a plan and a dream, And we can go with history, but we can't go with a little bit of bad history. So it would be the same, but of course, you're typically on a service industry, your margin's going to be a lot better. So you're not going to have those sunk costs. Your cash cycle is a lot different on a service business because you typically, until you start hiring employees, it's really you. On the other hand, that's when we would look, as would Robert, and say, okay, but if you have a $6,000 a month mortgage, that might impact it, because that's a kind of de facto expense that you've got, even though it's you yourself personally, but there's that drain on you that we have to overcome first. So again, think in your mind, always, kind of like what I did getting with my wife. You could fool them up front, but a year into it, you got to propose. We find the right one. Propose early, because a year into it, she figured it out. You're not the guy that and that's how it is with SBA lending.
One thing I will say is that we talked about being prepared, right? Making sure you're planning ahead, knowing how much capital you're going to need and whatnot. But it's also preparing yourself financially, because we always think as borrowers, whether that's consumer or business, we're always thinking it's about how much money I make, right? That's how I'm going to be able to afford this loan. It has absolutely zero to do with how much money you make. It's about how much discretionary income you have. And so I can have somebody that makes $1,000 a month but has zero expenses because they live at home or whatnot and they don't have any debt. The discretionary income is $1,000, right? Or somebody that makes $10,000 but has a Corvette and a $6,000 mortgage and credit card debt, and discretionary income is $300. Guess who's a safer bet for me? It's the person that makes $1,000. So you always have to remember, what can you control? It's harder to control income, but you can absolutely control debt and the decisions you make with that debt. So that's how you prepare mentally for those decisions that are coming ahead.
Good point. Luke?
Mark, that question would be probably for either one of the Roberts or Dan, but what kind of documentation would you look for that friends and family commitment? Your dad gives you $10,000. How do you guys want to see that documented? See if you've gotten that investment. Show what you put in the company.
I want to see a $10,000 deposit in your bank account.
Is it literally just that?
Yeah, see a $10,000 deposit in your bank account. I get a letter from your dad. I verify it with him. And then I want to know the terms of that $10,000. Is that a gift? Is that a loan? When is it required to be paid back? Most of the time it's a gift, so that's great. So I show some equity into your business expenses or your business startup costs. So yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that for us, at least. I'm not sure about Wells Fargo.
I'll let you about structures, but I can tell you for me what we traditionally look at. If you coming in and asking me to potentially look at your business for investment, number one is I want to understand what kind of entity you've created, what kind of shares you're giving out. There's different ways you can give shares. You can give different things that, depending on how the entity is structured, this is where the attorneys come in based on how you structure. The other piece I looked at, have you figure out exactly how many people have equity in your business? So also the structure of that equity, how much are you giving away for that? Just that whole element of understanding how the equity is being divvied out before I put the money in. So it's documentation of is the investment ready and set up ready to take investors. And that's one of the things that I look first of all before I say start taking money. Make sure you have that really well set up, because if anything, you can set yourself to fail and take more investment down the road if you don't do that in a clean way from the beginning.
One of the things that we do for startups is to provide a startup service where we'll incorporate the company or provide the corporate entity, LLC, corporation, et cetera. Make sure all of that is clean so that a guy like Robert or Dan can look at that and say, yeah, got it, it's understood. You've got a clean cap table. We really get this. Yeah. You've brought your capital in either via convertible note or a gift or some other hybrid kind of security. We're going to talk about that a little later. But it's all clean and it's all very easily understood for investors. Joe,
and worthwhile, because when you get down the road, I mean, that may be small money now, but if it becomes a problem, you want to be able to turn to that documentation and say, here's a clean note, it was a loan, there's no equity piece here, or this was the agreement. And whether it's showing another investor or another lender that here's what the situation is with my company, or whether there's a dispute about it, you want that documentation. And for a $2,000 package, it's well worthwhile to get that in order up front.
Yes, sir, in the back.
So, just hypothetically, I want to launch a company that will be global in scope, have an instant market. Everybody will want the product. I want to pay essentially zero taxes.
And you're not dealing drugs?
I'm not selling drugs. Okay. So does your company have experience setting up a corporate entity to accomplish that?
Yeah, we can talk about that. There's depending on what your product is and where your markets are, and where your operations will be. Well, yeah, and if you're selling software on the internet, that's one thing. If you're selling widgets that are manufactured in Mexico, but the market is in Europe and in the United States, that's a totally different thing. So you asked a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time to dig deep into that, but I'm happy to chat with you afterwards. Okay. Real quick on one of the things that we talked about was the different investors. Robert was saying how you understand what your cap table looks like. This was, I want to throw in there the point about accredited and non-accredited investors.
Yep.
Who knows what an accredited investor is? Okay, sir, what's an accredited investor?
Somebody that has a net worth of over $1 million, or their annual income is $200,000 or $200,000.
Damn. Are you a lawyer here at the firm? That's awesome. Great job, man. Thanks. So for those who do not meet that definition, those are unaccredited investors, and they must be sophisticated folks who have access to information about your business, whether that a founder or someone like that who may not be at that net worth level or that income level, who can still invest in the company. But you are limited to having no more than 35 of those in your cap table. Otherwise, you could blow some securities law exemptions. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, cap table, short for capitalization table. When I look at the business and say, here's the whole pie, I have 1,000 shares of the pie. 50 of them are for Robert, 50 of them are for this Robert, and 5 of them go to a bunch of other people each. How many of those other investors are accredited or not accredited? And all of that together is your capitalization for the company and what we call a cap table. Does that answer the question? Sir. So nothing. So what we were talking about there is a private placement. There are 2 different ways of selling securities. One is a registered offering. The other is a private placement. In the United States, securities must either be registered or exempt from registration in order to be sold. And so most all VC financings are private placements, either falling under some exemption from the securities laws. Does that make sense? Did that answer the question?
I guess so, yeah.
He's like, yeah, sure.
Not convinced.
Who's heard of crowdfunding? All right. Who's actually done anything on Kickstarter or anything like that, or our crowd?
GoFundMe.
You have? I'm sorry, miss?
GoFundMe.
GoFundMe? You did something on GoFundMe? What'd you do?
I put it up for my business. But
Okay.
I haven't gotten any funding yet.
Okay. No hits yet. Did you do something on Kickstarter, sir?
Our crowd.
Awesome.
Micro ventures.
Okay. You did something on our crowd. Are you part of our crowd right now?
Yeah.
That's great. So there's 3 different kinds of crowdfunding. Essentially, one is rewards-based, where you're essentially pre-selling your product. The other is debt-based, sort of peer-to-peer lending. And the third is what this gentleman was talking about, which is equity-based, where you're actually selling shares in your company. That third piece is still a little tricky right now because the Securities Exchange Commission has not come out with their final rules on that, and it's a little wild, wild west going on. The first of those, the Kickstarter programs where you can pre-sell some goods, those do really well. Who's heard of the company called Oculus? Yeah, purchased by Facebook last month for about $2 billion. Yeah, so they raised about $2.4 million in donations on Kickstarter from, maybe it wasn't Kickstarter, one of those reward-based crowdfunding sites. What they do is they make virtual reality goggles, not goggles, but headsets. And so you could donate some cash to their efforts and get a prototype or get a t-shirt or get a thank you note. And through all that, they raised $2 million, but none of those donors got any piece of the company. So when they sold to Facebook for $2 billion, they get the thank you note. So a little bit of a different concept. That's that on those. So all of that was dilutive versus dilutive financing. Who knows the difference between the two? Sir, what's a dilutive financing? Yeah, there you go. So when you sell shares in the company, like Robert's an investor in the company, that is a dilutive financing because you're diluting your own ownership of the company. Non-dilutive is when you take a loan from from this Robert or a Dan, right? Yeah. Trying to get through a few things real quick. Dan, can you walk us through some of the set-aside programs you were talking about earlier?
Sure, but this is one of the things that where we look at a business and go a little bit beyond. I mean, and to the gentleman's question back there, banks, we like simplicity. We really do. So sometimes we work at odds with CPAs, and because CPAs, what's their job, right? To make sure you pay no tax. Well, you have to show a taxable income to pay back the note, so that the debt. Sometimes these sophisticated ownership structures. At a certain point, you remember for small business, we're dealing with a credit officer who is saying, this is just really complicated here, and I'm not really sure what they're trying to get done here. So that reason that's a segue to some of these programs, because we also look and say, what's unique about this? When we look at a business, we say, and believe me, it's probably the biggest struggle. So every day you want to say, man, I should be doing that, because we see some fantastic businesses, and it's an incubator for incredible business in San Diego County. But one of the things that we look at is, how come I can't do that? So this is such a great idea. This guy gave me his business plan. He trusts me. I'm not going to go execute it. But we do look at it and say, what if somebody else picked up that business plan? Is there anything unique about this business? And that's one of the things you need to look at. So a lot of
times, what are the barriers to entry?
What are barriers to entry? So we say, I could go do this tomorrow, and that means anybody could do this tomorrow. One of the things that's unique, especially among veterans, is there are certain programs. SBA 8A set-aside program. They also have for minority groups, women-owned businesses. But again, for veteran-owned businesses, there are, with federal contractors or federal subcontractors, a number of set-aside programs. So you'll hear, 10% of this or 30% of our subcontractors must be service-disabled veterans, for example. One of the best things about that is that's a huge barrier to entry, right? You've got a lock on a part of the business. So especially when you're looking to do up your business plan, it's important for you to look at that. The SBA actually has a real user-friendly site on this that'll explain, especially if you do have a service-related disability or veteran or another protected class, another protected group. Make sure you investigate everything, because to a bank, to Robert as well, or to any of us up here, that's going to be okay. I can't just go do this tomorrow. I mean, I probably have to go, got to figure out a way to get to Afghanistan on my own. Then I got to figure out how to get service disabled, and it's way high, just a barrier to entry for me on that one.
There are other kinds of barriers to entry for intellectual property, that sort of thing. That's really important for equity investors too, right, Robert?
Yeah, definitely intellectual property is one of the things we look at. But I can tell you, we've invested in companies that went into areas that you go, wow, a case or something that you wouldn't think is not very unique. But what was unique about their model is that they had amazing channels to get it out. So again, I kind of got to go back to really, as you look at your model, yeah, intellectual property is a much more clear path of what you look for. But there's other models that you look at that you go, they just know how to get to those consumers quick. And by getting there faster, they're able to kind of, get the register to ring. So we kind of look at all those aspects. Are you an intellectual property business and you're in that space that's unique? That's a different way of analysis versus someone that's coming to you and saying, yeah, someone could replicate my business, but what I know and how am I going to get into market and the channels that I've got, going to blow it out of the water. And that also makes a difference. So again, I tell you, for me, what we look at is definitely, again, we want to understand how do you answering a problem in the real world that people care about. And that's a key piece that I always go back to and say, is that meaningful for us? Because our risk metric, and this is kind of the main difference you're going to find from investors versus traditional financing or lending, is that the risk profile and how we think about it is completely different. It's a total different language, and that's what you keep hearing here about why they see as risk versus we don't really talk about risk. We more talk about opportunity. Different view, right? And that's what I want you to think about when you're dealing with investors and early stage, discussions. That's really what it's about. It's about what's the opportunity.
And that's why we wanted to have both sides of this equation together, so you have all of it at once. Yes, sir.
My question is about this slide about the services business.
Yes.
Is that related to the SF-15 that you fill out to get somebody to determine whether you are a good lawyer or not? Is that what it is?
Correct. So to be classified as a service-disabled veteran-owned business, the SBA has a program that you go through and certify. A lot of it's self-certification, frankly.
Yep, it is.
But you're on your honor, right? And that allows you access to those programs.
Well, if you fill out for a government job to get under this service disabled veteran status, you have to fill out paperwork and provide them documentation, and you get classification as a room employer.
Correct.
I think this is what that is.
Yes.
Okay, so what does it mean, 51%, only 51% plus?
That's the ownership of your company. Must be 51% of the company or more owned by that service disabled veteran.
Okay,
So you can have other investors in the company, but the service disabled veteran must own it more than half of the company.
So if I'm the business owner, I can't have more than 49% of the company being funded other than through me. Is that what that is?
Funded is a different term, so we want to make sure we're using the terms correctly, right? So ownership is what we're talking about here. So before, like I was talking about, here's the whole pie. If I have 100 shares of the pie, I own 51 of them, and I'm a service disabled veteran, then I qualify for the program.
Okay, so if you get into share disbursement, that's what this is about.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Not ownership as a part of loan and investment.
Funding and loans, investment is one thing, loans is another. Because when you invest in a company, you're actually selling shares or in equity in the company, right? So you're diluting it. That's what we, yes, sir, in the back.
Yeah, on that same note, so basically that program helps out if you're really early on, but like once you start getting into dilution, you know, and raising funds, like you drop out of it real quick. Right?
That's true. So it's very important to have that plan to say, as I grow out of this set-aside program, are my operations going to be keeping pace so that I'm generating enough revenue, or I have access to other funds for capital that I continue to grow the business? That those inflection points where you're going to need the cash. Does that make sense?
Do you drop out of that program if that does happen?
You could, correct. Yeah.
And one thing, a lot of things that I dealt with a couple lives ago, I was actually with a small business office at TRW Aerospace, which now is Northrop Grumman. And one of the things that we used to do, we used to look at a lot of this, you know, ex-military folks, you know, retired military, and coming in and trying to create a business.
Subs, right?
To be our subs. And we're not government, we're doing government contracts, and we have requirements within those to actually give out to specific classifications. So that does occur, and actually it's amazing the businesses that I've seen come out of that. And that's a great way to get customers that won't look at you as risk, more they want to invest and help. Here's the catch to those programs, that either regardless you go to a company that's doing business with the government or directly to the government to sell that, is the cycle that it takes for you to get really into that flow. You know, the certifications, the time that really kind of what I saw is that the government doesn't give you a big contract right away. You start small, and then based on you proving your worth, they grow that business. So between now and then, you talk about being prepared to see it through till you start getting enough business from the government or subs of the government. That's why I see a lot of the challenges. A lot of you know folks that came in and spend the effort getting certified, they ran out of gas because by the time the actual income was coming in from that sale and the cash flow getting paid, it was difficult.
Yeah.
And I normally saw it was like about a 24-month to 3-year process. So you actually had some really good, decent type of business coming in. So just food for thought as you talk about clients and those programs, they do bring value, but it's not something that happens overnight.
And so on that not happening overnight, be careful of scams. All right. So there's a slide in your deck. There's all sorts of folks out there who will say we've got grants for veterans, we've got opportunities for you to be a prime or a subcontractor under our prime. Those could be thinly veiled phishing scams, okay, for trying to get at your identity and your PII, your personal identifying information, right? So just be aware of that. If it feels too good to be true, it might. Yes, ma'am.
Not to backtrack a little bit, but
Please.
for the STDOB,
Yep.
For that, if you I know I'm getting medically discharged, and I know I'm going to be considered a retired disabled veteran. Can I apply for that now? Because I'm trying to get, like what I've told you before, I'm getting everything online now. So as soon as I get out, I'm hitting or as soon as I want to, I'm hitting that running, which includes my financing. Are you able to do that now? Even though I'm not technically classified yet.
I think you need to wait for that. One thing you could do is get all your ducks in a row so that it's ready to file as soon as you have that classification. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, Robert, 5 C's of credit.
Yeah. We're missing one.
You're missing a 5, really?
We're missing credit.
That's at the top.
Yeah, that's at the top. But yeah, I mean, the 5 C's of credit, we always talk about those. You hear about those. Sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 5. But these are the key variables that you want to consider when you're going to get bank financing, right? And so one of the things that's hardest to measure is character. Because, you know, with credit capacity, I can look at your bank statements, I can look at your tax returns, I can look at your financials. Conditions, I could do research on conditions of your industry or economic conditions. Capital, I could find information within those same tools to get that information. Collateral, I know the value of something, right? I can look that up. But how do I measure character? Does anybody have any idea how I do that? I get to know you.
All my references.
That's right. That's right. It's just a one-on-one human interaction.
Facebook.
Totally. Yeah,
Facebook.
diligence. That's right.
Facebook
Yeah.
is a good one, but yeah, I mean, we get to know the individual on a personal level, and that goes a long way because it really gives us a background on what drives you, who you are, what your life circumstances have been, and how you handle those circumstances. So it's really an important factor. Another way to measure character is transparency, right? How open and how honest you are to us. Now, any lender, I'll tell you right now, we find out you're lying, the deal's done. There's no going back. We had somebody that we were working with that was applying for a loan, had a son co-signing. We never met the son, and it turns out that he was the son, if that makes sense.
Was he redneck?
No, but he was acting like he was the son. Even though he had the son's permission, we eventually found out, but the fact that he was not being transparent is a deal breaker for us. Talking about, we're going to have tough conversations. We're going to talk about personal financial information, right? So not everybody's credit is perfect, and there's challenges and things are going to happen in life where there's going to be those challenges, and we're going to have those conversations with you. And being honest and transparent is very, very important. And a lot of times people feel that if I'm being honest, are you going to report me to the government? If I'm telling you that I really make this amount of cash and I don't put it on my taxes, are you going to report me to the government? We're not going to do that because really what we're looking for is trying to figure out and put the puzzle together. You should always do that because if you're going to be a growing business, we always recommend that you report everything possible and be as transparent as possible because that's not going to allow you to grow. So that's really how you measure character as far as Accion is making sure that the individual is as open and honest as possible. Yes, sir.
There seems to be, from my perspective, an inordinate amount of emphasis put on credit reports. And they're almost looking like they're using that to evaluate your character.
That's very true. And I completely agree with you. And that's actually why I work with Accion, because I'm a retired banker. Dan knows that.
Tell me how you.
But it's actually very, very true that our society emphasizes our FICO score very much to do anything, to get a job, to buy a home, to buy a car, to rent something, to do anything. But really, it seems to be an unfair measurement. There's a lot of information there that's very valid and true, but most of us, if you talk to a consumer, they have no idea how a FICO score works. They have no idea what raises a FICO score, what lowers a FICO score. You could be paying everything on time and as agreed, but if you don't understand that your available credit line impacts your credit score, that means you're going to have a low credit score, and it has nothing to do with what you're doing as an individual and being responsible. So I agree with you completely, and that's why we look at credit a lot differently. We don't have a minimum FICO score. We don't care what the FICO score is. We want to make sure and we analyze what's on the credit, and if there is something negative, tell me about it. Tell me what happened here. Oh, hey, I lost my job and I didn't have health insurance, and these metal collections came to my credit, and I went back and I paid them, or I have a payment plan. That shows character. That shows that you're willing to do and take care of what your responsibilities are after the fact. Or, hey, I had to file bankruptcy because my house was underwater and I just couldn't afford the payments anymore. That happens. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person. Doesn't mean that you don't have high character. It's just a life circumstance. So really getting to know the individual and getting to know their circumstances around why things happen is key to what we do in analyzing somebody's credit report. And again, our average FICO score for a $4 million portfolio is in the low 600s. And over 99% of our clients pay us back as agreed. So it's not just numbers that we're running. It's really getting to know the individual.
So one of the things about character is when you have a loan agreement with the bank and you signing onto covenants that the company is required to maintain.
Yeah.
So Joe, what are some of the problems that you can advise folks about making sure that they don't step over, some of the covenant issues?
Sure, and I think tailing on what Robert was saying, I find that a lot of lenders, they're looking at the character as risk analysis. Am I going to get paid back? But also because lenders are looking to enter into a business relationship, and they're looking at it in some terms as a long-term business relationship, and they would like to grow and be the lender for your company as you move forward. So not just what's the risk, but can I trust this person if we get into hard times, or if things don't work out, are they going to do the right thing as well? And so along those lines, the banks and other lenders want protection. So they're looking at, what are the risks to me, not just in cash flow, but how do I make sure that I get paid if things do take a turn? And so, not only do you have liens that a lot of lenders will want to put on the business assets, but they'll also ask for covenants. And those are essentially promises from you as the company borrower that I'm going to meet certain targets, or I'm going to maintain certain financial ratios, or I'm going to maintain certain reporting requirements. And a lot of the negotiation that we do in the loan agreement and getting the loan agreement set up, getting the security agreement set up, is around those covenants. And what we always talk to our borrowers about is, be realistic. Don't feel like you have to give away the farm here. The lender needs to be protected. They have their own underwriters, they have their own investors, they have their own risks that they're shouldering. But at the same time, you need to be able to operate your business. And so you can't make promises that you can't fulfill. So, I've been in countless situations where, the bank or other lenders send over a document that has, borrowers going to agree to a leverage ratio of X. And they're ready to sign it, and you ask the question, are you able to do that? I mean, is that realistic? They go back to the accounting staff, and they say, are we able to do this? And they say no. And those are promises that were almost made and could be easily broken, and that's when the problem starts. So I think, from a covenant perspective, it's important for a company to come into that situation, come into those negotiations with a really realistic view of their ability to perform those, because those are the pitfalls that as an optimist you may not see and you may not want to look at, but may come to fruition later on. And I guess along with financial covenants is also thinking about reporting requirements. A lot of lenders will want you to provide them with financial reporting on a periodic basis, whether it's monthly or quarterly or annually.
Same for equity investors too.
Same for equity. And you really need to think about how much manpower is that going to take me to meet these requirements, because it is going to take some. And you want to be dead sure that when you give them those documents at the end of that period, you're 100% certain they're accurate. So those are the kind of issues that we wrestle with in the negotiations on the lending side, and try to advise our clients to really be pragmatic and practical about whether they can fulfill them.
One thing I'll tell you from the investment side, so when you talk about, you talked about character, and so from an investment side, how do you check that? So am I looking at credit reports? Well, no. Sometimes we might if we have suspicions, but we really don't. What we look for is that when you're approaching someone that, especially someone I don't know, you got to come through an introduction that I know. You see, that's kind of how we kind of vet the filtration process, is that if you have an investor you just met and you go in there and you say, hey, by the way, I got this great opportunity, invest in me, I can tell you most likely you're not going to get anything from that, because there has to be a relationship built. You got to come not from just give me money. There got to be a lot of things that got to be put in place prior to talk the money discussion about should I invest. And so just be aware, especially if you're a new entrepreneur and you're excited about your business and you want others to invest in your business, think about your network. That's the key. And I can tell you, with specifically talking to people that come out of the service, their biggest challenge, because the biggest challenge that I see, we were already invested in a couple, actually, people that retired from the military. Unfortunately, they were not U.S. We actually invested in Israelis. And I see the value that there is people coming out of the service, because they understand discipline, they understand a number of different things of that you normally new entrepreneurs don't have, that you guys get. And but one of the biggest thing is the lack of network. And one of the things that I see different entrepreneurs from Israel coming from entrepreneurs that come out of the service in both areas in Israel and the U.S. is that the Israeli network for those people coming out of the service is stronger. They can transition into a more business-like model and get connected faster than people in the service here. And that's the only thing I can tell you is that you're working on that network beyond just what you came out of the service is critical, because that's what opens door for investors, for potential clients, and that's what I see the struggle. A lot of it is that initial network is very difficult to build.
Yep.
Question related to network. How important is a board of advisors who do have a reputation, track record in the field?
Critical.
When you don't, if you're a new entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's one of the first things when I, mentor some of early starts, regardless if you're, just new to the start piece. One of the critical things I highly recommend is get an advisory board. Not a board, but an advisory board. And if you're good enough to convince good people to be on your board, advising, because most of the time there's no equity involved, they just really like who you are and what you're doing, that tells me something, right? And then later on, you can start talking about equity, but that's one easy step to see how strong you are telling others to say, believe in me and give me your time. So, yeah, very important.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, from a time perspective, it seems like from the startup angle, it's important that it's time to raise money from the VC and also the angel.
If you raise money from a VC.
Well, and that's another question. So
Yeah.
As you're building your company, you're getting a little bit of press, done marketing or bootstrapping on your own.
Yeah.
You'll get people, and I get quite a few people, VC firms, who will schedule meetings with me to talk about my product, and then they'll ask me traction, they'll ask me all these things.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, okay, well, when you're ready for Series A, let me know.
Yep.
And for those of you who don't understand Series A, that's, bootstrap, and you're going to get seed round, then Series A. So it's not a lot, right? How do you, and I try to be straightforward and asking them questions as to whether or not they're interested in funding or funding. And how do you get to, how long would you say it typically takes to build that relationship where you finally say, okay, look, I'm giving you this data every month. I don't really want to give out all my traction data to every VC in the world or in the world.
It's really like dating. Seriously, there are a lot of analogies, and Robert, I'd really be interested in your perspective.
Yeah.
But if you meet the right VCs who really understand your space and really understand what you're going for, the relationship could happen like that. Other times, it may take a couple different companies that you may have started and failed or started and succeeded at, and then that VC finally understands, oh yes, this person actually does know what they're doing. Let me give them more time and develop that relationship. So there's no black and white answer to that. Robert, what do you?
The main thing, I'm going to go back to my early statement. How did those VC find you? Did they actually make the first move, or you went out and actually set up the meeting? So that's number one. I can tell you what I normally see. Again, depends on the terms and everything else. But you pretty quickly know early in the process if you have a deal. And it has to do, just very simple. If a VC doesn't get back to you, it means no. Okay? Don't wait for the no. It's no. If it's on, you'll get a lot of conversation coming pretty quickly and information back and forth. The key is like how they met you. Okay? Were you introduced? Or one thing I tell anybody, if you're thinking about venture capitalist money, is that if you do a blast email, just a cold blast email to say, someone gave me a list of VCs, that's the fastest way to blackball your company. So don't do that. Make sure you get introduced properly. Sometimes you don't even want to talk about investment, just that relationship piece. So again, what I tell you is that definitely, be very selective about what VCs you talk to, because one thing what I would say, just the investment game, if you're an entrepreneur, just really think about how much time you might be wasting chasing this money versus focusing and generating sales and growing the business. So is that crazy balance, like you're saying, there is money when you don't need it? Well, I know in the early start you need both. You need money, you need to grow it, so I get it. But just remember, if you can get lost pretty quickly creating pitches and talking to people that don't know really crap about what you're doing, and they're just giving you advice and sending you down a path that completely messed up your business. So just be really aware, be key about understanding, again, the introduction, where it comes from, And if there's an interest and you're filling a gap in their portfolio, a lot of the things that happen behind the scenes that I'll share with you is that a lot of the VCs is like everybody has to have a little bit kind of like their precious nugget, and they don't want the other VC to know what that is. It's about like the new thing, right? So that's why you see very little investment, because everybody's trying to have the hottest, latest thing. And so talking to too many VCs might not be a good thing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And it's timing. Sometimes we have a gap in their portfolio that you might fit that specific gap. Great. Number one question I'll ask you to any angel or any VC, your first question before you ask for any non-disclosures or any of that crap, are you active? People don't ask that, and they have you through all these discussions about, oh, tell me this, tell me that. Well, are you actively investing? Oh, I'm not investing right now. We're full, and we won't do investments till next year. Why the hell are you talking to me? And the reason is VCs will talk to you because that's their job. They want to know what's the latest thing. So just be aware. So again, I'll talk to you that if they're kind of leading you on, I would say cut it because it's not on. After, I would say definitely 4 or 5 weeks of back and forth, and it's not moving to a point of like term sheet and discussions like that, you don't have a deal, in my opinion.
And you're right, it is a little similar to dating. I found that if I just leave them alone and don't respond to any emails, they stalk me.
It's like no one's like, hey,
See,
what happened?
women have more power in that relationship.
They do.
So, yeah.
Just kidding.
We didn't really get through a lot of the slides. There's, a whole half a deck left, and I recognize it's about 5 minutes after 7. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time and say thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the audience for coming. But we will be around afterwards to answer a few questions, and our contact info is in the back. Again, thanks so much for coming. Really